Don't change that dial. It's time for your go-to source for all things entertainment and caffeinated. Now give it up and welcome to the stage, Eva and DJ!
I'm DJ Blokzyl.
And I'm Eva Crowe.
And this is the Inks and Lattes podcast, where we're spilling the ink and dishing out drinks.
So DJ and I are both members of the Creative Coffee Cafe Discord network, this amazing place where creatives can come together, chill out, bounce ideas, get support, and just hang out with their fellow creatives. It's an amazing community, so now we're going to feature some work from some of our talented members.
Today, we want to tell you about CCC member Blokzyl and their new 4-track album that just dropped on August 16th. The Far Side of Eternity by Blokzyl is available for digital copy purchase on Bandcamp for $5 US. Be sure to snag it up and support this incredible creator.
Blokzyl is a vapor-style producer who dabbles in and across musical genres, from R&B to deep house. They have a passion for video games, skronky beats, and their goal of creating an affordable library of tracks available for streamers, content producers, and small companies to use for any and all creative purposes. From background music and presentations to songs for an album, they believe there's always a track to be made. They have exclusive and non-exclusive commission works available, with public releases every 2 months or so on streaming platforms, along with Bandcamp exclusive releases being announced regularly. Merch and physical listening mediums are coming soon as well. And you can find the link for that in the description below.
And just a quick reminder of some other great CCC related things. Wolf Wyoming Designs has all kinds of beautiful tumblers, mugs, and stemless wine tumblers. They offer pre-made designs and also accept custom orders. Owner and creator Vicky has even put out a special dripping creativity tumbler that's amazing, and 15% of the sales on those go back into the Creative Coffee Cafe.
And then don't forget to check out the Bewitchery, a small online shop that offers spell kits, fragrances, jewelry, candles, and lots of other witchy things.
And if you ever need some maps made, Justin at the DM's Guide is still open for TTRPG map making commissions. You can DM him on Instagram at the DM's Guide or reach out to him via his website.
And then lastly, Aster at Aster's Mystic Bedhead has a shop on Ko-fi. Check out Aster's tiny art and snag your own adorable, one-of-a-kind piece of Aster's tiny art. And then again, all links can be found in the description below.
And now it is time for our topic of the week. Today, we decided we're going to talk about cult classics. Specifically movies. I'm not sure if, would you ever just consider, and no one hears about cult albums, really.
Right.
When you think of cult classics, you always think of movies. I never think of, books or albums or games or anything like that. It always seems to be movies that we talk about when we talk about cult classics.
Yeah. And I think there's some different things that kind of contribute to something being considered a cult classic. I did a little bit of research beforehand because in my mind, a cult classic was always just a movie that didn't do as well at the box office and then garnered a massive following later, which technically, apparently, according to the internet, that is kind of one of the things still that qualifies something as a cult classic. But as you and I were talking about previously, DJ, the other thing is like that kind of fan base that those films kind of garner, and those kind of like niche, like subject matter, kind of, right? Like, what's your definition of a good cult classic?
I mean, it's funny because reading about cult classics, I discovered one that is considered a cult classic that I never would have considered is The Wizard of Oz. Like, going by definition of what you were talking about first with cult classic, it flopped at the box office when it first came out. And in fact, it didn't even really become popular till 10 years later when they started showing it on TV. And I think I remember reading about this actually too, where I think it. Oh wait, no, it wasn't. I was thinking of No, I was thinking of another movie, but like Wizard of Oz, it came out later, and it became popular once they started showing it on TV, and that's when it became popular. I think just because it's different, right? And
Hmm.
no, it's funny though because it is one of those things where you think that it's always been popular, but no, it
Right. And I
flopped
think,
originally, and so like you wouldn't think that that's a cult classic, uh, but it is.
yeah, I think that's almost like a telltale sign when you kind of, because I also like deep dove into like what people consider cult classics. Um, and I think that is kind of like a common denominator is they're films that like now that they've been out for a while, everyone knows that film or they've all heard of that film. Even if they haven't seen it, they know of it. You know what I mean? And it's kind of like their
Yeah.
cultural effect that those films have are huge. Like, um, but I think that's kind of one of it where like after the fact, everyone's like, "Oh yeah, everybody knows that movie." Like everybody knows Pulp
Right?
Fiction, right? Like Pulp Fiction is a huge cult
Yeah.
classic, but at the time, nobody really cared about it. But now, if you ask, however many, God, how many years has that been? 30 something years, pushing
I
30
know,
years,
right?
give or take. Um, yeah, that like when you ask people now, that's such a classic movie in like cinema history, and I think that is kind of one of those deciding factors almost with cult classics. Like I know Kill Bill is considered a cult classic now. What were some other ones I saw? Fight
I think
Club.
another a modern one that I would say that was like Idiocracy.
Oh, I love that movie. That movie's so
Yeah,
good.
see, that's the thing. It bombed in the box office
Right,
though.
right.
Like it did not do well when it came out. It did get great reception. Even the critics hated it.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone's just like, "Oh my god, this movie is so lame."
Yeah,
And then I think it's one of those movies where it ended up becoming a cult classic because it was one of those movies that's really it was ahead of its
it
time.
was. It was
Really.
underappreciated at the time because like I know there may be some of our younger listeners who may not know that film as well, but like anyone from like kind of our age group, which is 30s, 30-year-old ish, we'll say 30s to 40s, that age group though. If you quote something from Idiocracy, most people will know what you're talking about. Like, to this day, if I say, it's got electrolytes. It's what plants crave. Like people know that that's from Idiocracy. You know what I mean? Because it is. It's such a
Yeah.
like cultural phenomena, like in a way. Because and that's another good point since you brought up Idiocracy. I think a lot of those films have very um kind of unconventional storytelling and like subversive themes. Like the whole concept of
Yeah.
that movie is about like the future of where the world is. If we stay on this track, this is what their version of the future they think is going to look like. And when you're watching it, you're like, damn, some of that hits too close to home. Some of it you're like, that seems a little too realistic and that is scary. And that's, I think, a
Yeah.
good point.
Yeah. Well, they have like a cultural impact even
Hmm.
too. So idiocracy, like so that like quotes is a really big thing. A lot of cult classics end up having those quotes,
Mm,
like you said, where you could say something and you know exactly where it's from and what it means and why it's so hilarious
yeah,
in some cases.
yeah. I'm trying to think of
Although
one.
one thing I
Go ahead.
one thing I was thinking too, like a difference. What's the difference between something that'd be like a cult classic and just a classic?
Ooh, that is a
Because I'm thinking like something like Mean Girls. Would that be a cult classic, or is it just a classic?
hmm.
Because there is a very much like it had a cultural significance,
Right. Oh, for
and
sure.
there's definitely like kind of a cult following. But it almost feels like it wasn't one of those ones. It was big when it came out. Like it was popular when it came
Yeah, I
out.
think I just actually
I
Googled
don't
it.
know
Yeah, I just Googled it to see if like there was a simple answer to that question of the difference. And according to this, it says that classics refers to a movie that is widely recognized and appreciated by a large audience. And then a cult classic describes a movie that has generated a dedicated fan base over time, often due to its unique appeal, characters, or themes. So if
yeah.
it was
So in
an
that case,
instant
Mean
hit,
Girls wouldn't be a cult.
yeah, that's probably more of a
Yeah, Mean
classic.
Girls was an instant hit.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
And that's like another good example of a cult classic, Princess Bride.
Yes, excellent movie.
And it bombed in the box office. It did not do well,
Hmm.
but when it came out in home video, people started watching it. They're like, "Hey, this is actually pretty good." And then word of mouth got around. It built up, and then it became this huge phenomenon where it is probably one of the most quotable movies of all time at this point.
Oh yeah.
Everyone knows quotes from Princess Bride at
Well,
this
and
point.
that's the thing too, is I think that a lot of cult classics, they're almost like a little secret, like with like for movie fans. For fans of like cinema in
Yeah.
general, cult classics are like super appreciated by that fan base. Um, More so than people that just enjoy the occasional movie. You know what I mean? Like people that just enjoy a
Yeah.
good movie that's like really popular, like the people that were like, oh, we're going to go see the Barbie movie because it's huge. And I'm not knocking the Barbie movie, it's amazing, but but you know what I mean? It's like it's almost like a
Or any of the
little.
Marvel movies or something
Right,
like
right.
that,
It doesn't take
basically.
away anything from those films. It's just that like cult classics are almost like a secret little club that like big movie people, movie snobs, if you will, tend to love the cult classics. They love From Dusk Till
I
Dawn, like Pulp
I think
Fiction.
it's an underdog story
Yeah.
kind of thing too, right? So it's like the little movie that didn't do well,
Mm-hmm.
but then becomes appreciated over time. So everyone's just like, oh, but you're right. It's kind of like where like it comes out, no one really liked it, but then you got these people just like, what do you mean you didn't like it? It was awesome, and
It's
then
almost
that
like a little
awesomeness ends
club.
up growing.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're right. Like a club where you're just like, I'm part of this club, and that's where the cult part
Mm-hmm.
of a cult classic comes in, right? Where you've got this cult of people who are just like, oh yeah, this movie's awesome. This movie is the best, and
Yeah.
they are like completely dedicated to this being this awesome movie, despite what anyone else
Yeah,
says.
and I think it's like with the newer generations, right? Like Gen Z, Gen Alpha, people that are coming into these films and watching them as they get older, they're going to be rediscovering those films and realizing how amazing they are. You know what I mean? More so than just like there's so many movies put out nowadays. It's like the industry is so saturated, like oversaturated with film after film after film. It used to be a whole thing where a new movie would come out and it was like a big whole thing, but like these people, like that kid that loves movies, he like when he's in his 20s, someone's going to be like, "Have you ever seen The Big Lebowski?" And he's going to be like, "No, what is that?" And they're going to be like, "Oh man, you got to watch it. It's so good. It's like a classic. You got to watch it." And that kid's going to watch The Big Lebowski and he's going to be like, "How did I not know about this movie?" I feel like cult classics stand the test of time because so many of
Yeah,
them hold up. Like, The Big Lebowski is still hysterical to this day. It is one of the most quoted cult classics of anyone. Like, there's that one big quote from that movie, where the main character, Jeff Bridges, the dude, he does the whole, "I'm the dude, so that's what you call me." And he does this whole, like, little bit, and it's such
but
a, like,
that's just
iconic
like your
quote.
opinion,
Yeah,
man.
exactly. It's just so perfect, and, like, all of the cult classics have that. I just watched Fight Club, yesterday because I was tossing around Fight Club
Okay.
being my pick, to be honest, because I love Fight Club. I love the book, I love the film, it's fantastic. And I hadn't seen it for a while, and as I was watching it, I was like, "Man, this movie holds up." It's dated now for, like, I mean, it should be dated, but it's not. Like, it feels so relevant today. And even after all this time, it's still just such a relevant movie with such a relevant theme of, like, anarchy, mayhem, and like, what does he say? What's the big quote? "You're not your fucking khakis." Like, it's so good. And I was like, man, it still hits. And I think that's like the one of the distinguishing features of a cult classic. They just never get old.
And it's like in some cases they're like they come across as like weird or subversive in
Mm-hmm.
some way, kind of like Fight Club did.
Yeah.
And then so at the time when it comes out, it can feel kind of weird and odd, which is why it doesn't get that initial following. But over time, as people discover it and be like, okay, maybe this movie is better than we thought.
Mm-hmm.
Emperor's New Groove, I think, is another
So good.
cult classic in the sense where it didn't do all that well in the box office, but just because it was just so different. It was a
It
Disney
is.
movie, but it was just so different than every other Disney
Yeah.
movie that had been coming out in the 90s. Like, and it was originally supposed to be just like that, but they ended up having to change it. And so instead of being this big musical, it ended up being just really campy comedy
Right.
that was just entirely zany and had this kind of like old school Looney Tunes feel to
Yeah.
it, and everyone loved it. It was so quotable, and now it's at this point people meme Emperor's New Groove all the
Oh
time
yeah.
now.
It's one of those it's like it's one of the few Disney movies it's like there's no princess. There's no, you got Cusco
Yeah, yeah.
and
There's no love
hosted
story.
by
There's no
yeah, voiced by the amazing David Spade, by the way. Like, shout out to David Spade. He is fantastic in that film. That is such a good one. Like that I would have never thought was a cult classic, but it totally is. Like the whole like, oh, bad llama, like that's still like a big thing from that movie. Oh, it's so good.
it is one of my favorite movies of all time.
Yeah.
It is one that I probably have watched more than any other movie at this point. Oh yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Everything about that. Pull the lever, Kronk. Wrong lever.
When she's the cat and she's like, is that my
Why do
voice?
we even have that lever? Yeah, is that my voice? Is that
Yes,
my
it's so
voice?
good. Um okay.
You know what's funny too? Like I never realized when the movie came out that Yzma is voiced by Eartha Kitt.
Oh, really? I did not know that either.
Yes, yeah. The voice of Yzma is also the person who sang Santa Baby.
For people who don't know who that is, yeah, good save there.
For people who don't know who Eartha Kitt is if you've ever heard the song Santa Baby, the original
Hmm.
version, that is Yzma.
Yeah. Um, okay, so we've talked about what makes a good cult classic. So now we're going to go to our pick of the week, which is our personal favorite cult classic. So DJ, I went first last time, so you can start us off.
All right, well, I'm going to go with a definite cult classic here that I'm sure most people have seen at this point. A huge cultural impact. Monty Python and the Holy Grail. It is. I remember first watching it when I was a teenager, and it's funny. Like watching it as a teenager, there are certain scenes in that movie that I absolutely loved. Like I remember when I first saw it, I loved the Black Knight scene. That was my favorite scene
Hmm.
in the movie, where he's like, "Have at you," and he's like, "Ah, come back at you," and he's like, "What are you doing? Your arm's gone." No, it's not. I love just the whole subversiveness of that whole thing. I loved it. I died laughing at that part. But then as I got older, there were other scenes where I'm just like, okay, you know what? I thought I found some certain scenes that I found kind of like whatever at first when you're a kid
Hmm.
because you don't quite necessarily understand some of the
Yeah,
stuff.
you don't
But
get
when you get
it.
older, you understand it more. Yeah, yeah, like the whole like the politics scene where he's going up to where they're talking about I am your king,
Hmm.
and he's like talk about swords and dispersing swords. I'm trying to remember some of the quotes from but that's funny because like that scene when I was a kid, I didn't care about the scene at all. But as I got older and I watched it, now it's one of my favorite scenes right there because I understand it more. At the time when I was a kid, I didn't understand a lot of the stuff that they were talking about. It was like, oh, politics, whatever. But then when you get older, it's like, oh, okay, I see now how that's funny. And then the other things that are great about it too is just all the long jokes that they have, like the stuff that carries on, the whole thing with the coconuts and the
The
swallows, and then
coconuts, yeah.
having that end at the movie, and then having the
Yeah.
question at the end of the movie where his knowledge of knowing how like the airspeed velocity of a swallow ends up helping him at the end. And I'm like, oh my god, that is amazing. But even like yeah, it's just so subversive. It was an incredibly subversive movie at the time. Even the credits, they were making fun of the credits at the beginning of the
Yes.
movie, where it's like, oh, just so right from the opening, there's just like, okay, this is not your typical movie.
Yeah, I
This
actually
is
have
weird,
that
and
pulled
I
up.
think in
That's so funny that you bring the credit thing up because they had the we apologize again for the fault in the subtitles. Those responsible for sacking the people who have just been sacked have been sacked. It's just like it sets the tone.
fact. Yeah, it really set the tone right there, and it's just like it really you have no idea what to expect. And then even like right at the beginning of the movie, where you see him like on the horse, and then you're waiting for the horse, and you find out that it's just him banging two coconuts together, and you're like, what the hell? And then they go up to the castle, and it's so subversive because it ends up making fun of
Mm-hmm.
itself, because then the people on top of the castle are like, what do you mean you came on a horse? You're doing with two coconuts.
Right.
And it just leads to this whole conversation about coconuts and the possibility of, wait, how do you even have coconuts in the first place? Where it's just so meta. And it's funny because, again, when I was a kid, that scene, I was just like, I was just whatever. It was kind of a boring scene. Like, oh, they're talking about, like, I didn't care about that, because when you're a kid, that press like, eh. But when you get older and you're understanding the subversiveness of why that's funny, and you're like, oh my god, like, seriously, this, it was just that opening there, and then it just carries
Yeah.
on through the entire movie, where they keep subverting what you expect to
Mm-hmm.
happen in each scene. And I think that's what really made it the classic, and where I think, in that sense, cult classics work, because a lot of them tend to subvert and show you something different than what you're used to seeing in a movie. And that's why they don't always often do well at the beginning, because it's not what you expect. But there's a certain subset of people that get it and
Right.
love it and promote it, and it becomes this growing, huge growing of support and love for the movie that just grows over time, because it was done so well, in that kind of sense. And like you said, because it was done so well, it holds up over
Mm-hmm.
time. And I think you're right in that it cult classics need to be the kind of movie that hold up over time, because that's how they grow into being a
Right.
cult classic, because it requires that effort, that time, where over time it just holds up, and you get more and more people over time that grow to
Mm-hmm.
love that
Yeah,
movie.
and it's one of those that has spawned like so many things that come from Monty Python. Like they do like aren't there like conventions and shit like that or something like that?
Oh yeah.
There
Well,
I
there's
know
a
that it's just like
musical.
it's
There's a musical, Spamalot, that's based off the movie
yes.
itself.
That's right.
And I mean,
That's right.
John
Yeah, and
Cleese
I think that
himself,
is
because
it's
of the whole thing there,
yes.
he ended up becoming a huge movie star from all that.
Right. Right. Yeah, it really is just such a good film. Like
I
Monty
can
Python
watch
is just
it.
one of those things
I
that
can rewatch it time and time again. I will never grow old of watching Monty Python. And again, it's I think it's cult too,
right.
because it's a certain kind of, there's a certain kind of person that you have to be to really get that there. And not to say that I like that you're not a good, like, movie watcher. Like, if you don't get it, you don't get it, and that's cool. But there's a certain kind of
Right.
people where that kind of humor, and that kind of thing appeals to a certain kind of cult classic, which is why that kind of movie appeals, has a kind of cult following, where if you get it, you get it. If you don't, you don't. And so you
Right.
get that cult appeal, where you're either in that cult of appreciating that movie, or you don't.
Right.
Like, you're not like, Monty Python, whatever. You're either you love Monty Python, or you don't love Monty Python.
Yeah, that is kind of a big thing with like the cult classics. So yeah, that is a good point. Is that a lot of them are almost kind of polarizing in that regard, where you're either in or you're not. Like you either love it or you don't. Like Rocky Horror is a big one like that. You either love Rocky Horror Picture Show or you don't get it. There's no in between. Okay, well,
And that gets where the cult part of it comes in, right?
right. Did you have anything else for yours?
No, it is your turn. Go ahead with your pick.
Okay, I actually watched my pick this morning because it's been a minute since I've watched it and I
Oh,
love it. Um, my pick is Boondock Saints. Have you ever seen Boondock Saints?
I have not seen
Ooh,
it yet. No, I have not.
it is so good. Such a good movie. So the whole premise of the film is there's these two Irish brothers. It takes place in Boston. Um, and it has Willem Dafoe in it, Norman Reedus, a bunch of great people. Um,
Wait,
Ron,
Norman Reedus?
yeah,
Like,
hmm
we're talking about, like, pre-Walking Dead Norman Reedus
yes,
here?
yes, pre
Wow.
Walking Dead Norman Reedus. I know. Um, he's one of the main characters too. Ron Jeremy is also in it, which is weird. He is so gross in it. But so yes, the film it follows these two Irish brothers, and basically, long story short, they get it in their head that it's their kind of mission from God because they are like devout Catholics. It is their mission from God to rid the world of bad men, bad people. Mainly, yeah, it is just men. But so basically, they start. The whole film is like vigilante justice, cop.
I was about to
Yeah,
say it feels like it has that vigilante justice kind of Punisher kind
yeah,
of vibe there, right?
100%. Because it does take place in Boston, and it deals with a lot of like the big crime syndicates in Boston, like the Russian mob, the Italian mob, like all of these things.
Oh,
And
so yeah, it's kind of fighting the mob kind of deal there.
mm,
Okay.
and so they basically the first job kind of falls under their lap, and then enter um they end up accidentally killing like two Russian mob, like lower end guys.
Oh.
And because they're Russian mob, the Boston PD has to call in the feds. So enter Willem Dafoe, who I love in general. Willem Dafoe is incredible, but it is my favorite thing he has ever done. It is so, so good. He plays this sassy asshole of an FBI cop, and he is basically tasked with like tracking them down. And I think Boondock Saints is just it's one of those movies that when you talk about cult classics and you talk about and it bombed at the box office, and then people started watching it and they were like, this movie's fucking great. What? Like, how did this bomb? It's that kind of movie where it's just so well done. Like Willem Dafoe alone makes that movie 100% worth watching because he is just that good in it. Um and there's so many like quotable lines. Um It's, part of the cult classic thing where they talk about like kind of unique cinematography, that is a big one for Boondock Saints. The cinematography in it is incredible. Willem Dafoe's character, whenever he's like going through a crime scene, he like and it dates the movie so hard because he like pulls his like suit jacket back and he's got a gigantic Walkman on his belt. Like
Oh my god.
and then he like
Yeah, that's
yeah,
so
it's
90s right
so
there.
90s,
Oh
dude.
my god.
And he like puts the headphones on and he like presses play on his Walkman and it's like this operatic like classical music and he's like listening to it while he's like inspecting this crime scene. And he's basically this like amazing FBI agent who can tell exactly what happened, but he's basically tasked with like finding out who's doing this. And then long story short, so they end up they end up obviously killing these different mobsters and stuff. And there's this like moral predicament where him as the FBI agent, he's kind of like, what do all these people have in common that they're killing? And then he's like, they're all bad men. And he kind of gets to this point where he's like, I don't really disagree. Like, who cares if these guys are
Do I
dead? They're
even want to?
horrible.
Yeah, it's like, do I want to actually arrest these people? Do I want to
Yeah.
stop what they're doing?
Yeah, and like it's such a great film. It is super fucking funny. Like it is hysterical. There's a part where like Willem Dafoe, hey, he hates the one cop, the one like Boston PD cop. He's just an idiot, and he's constantly giving him shit. And every time the guy says something stupid, Willem Dafoe like makes him go run an errand or something. So like the guy says something stupid, and he's like, "Oh, I think I may be wanting a bagel with my coffee." And like so he makes the guy go get him a bagel and it's like this whole thing and it's just so good. Like it's such a quotable movie. There's a part I can't even go into it. But it's just one of those films that it has such a like it has such a like niche um appeal for like vigilante justice and stuff like that. And it's one of those it is kind of a controversial film in a way because they are coming at it from a very religious perspective. Like they think they're on like a mission from God in a sense. Like they're very
Mhm.
religious. And and they have this friend Rocco who like kind of is like a package boy for the Italian mob, and like he's kind of a shithead. Like Rocco is kind of a shady dude, but he's not so bad that he's like considered a bad man. You know what I mean? So it's interesting to see like what they deem worthy of like them.
Yeah, so it's like, what's the line at that point,
Right.
right?
And it's funny because at the end of the film they play into that concept where at the end of the film it cuts to like a news reporter, and she basically says like she's interviewing people on the street asking them like, what do you think about the saints? That's what they like dub them. And you get all these people that are like, no, who are they to play God? Like, they're not judge, jury, and executioner. And then you have people that are like, like, there's one quote that's like really popular from that part. And it's this woman that's like, fuck them motherfuckers. The more people they kill, the better it is for everybody. And she's just all about it. And it's like a classic like quote from that movie. And her friend's like, don't say that. Like, don't say that. And so it shows that
You
kind of
can't
back
say
and
that on
forth.
TV.
Yeah, it shows that back and forth where people were like, no, this is not okay. And then the people that are like, hey, get those bad people off the streets. I wish they were in every major city. So it kind of plays into it. Like it's very aware of the fact that it has that moral dilemma in it because you're watching it and you're like, these guys are bad. They are bad dudes. And you're like,
It
do we?
really makes you think like that, basically, eh?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And it's great because as you're watching it, your train of thought is kind of mirroring Willem Dafoe's train of thought.
Hmm.
And it's such a
Yeah.
well done film, and it's funny, it's got action, it's got violence, like it's got all the good things, and it's 100% worth watching. It's one of my favorite cult classics ever. They did make a second one. It's not great. I'm not gonna lie. I mean, it's not terrible. I've seen worse things, but it is no comparison to the original first
not
Boondock
something
Saints.
you'd not something you'd necessarily recommend. Just
No, I don't
stick with the
care about
first,
the
and
second
then
one at all. I've seen the second one, and I've only watched it once. It's fine. But yeah, you should definitely check it out. It is a great, great movie. Again, gonna wrap up this week's episode of Inks and Lattes. Thank you guys for hanging out. We are here every Wednesday as part of the Dripping Creativity podcast, hosted by the amazing Chris Corvin. Hopefully you've subscribed by now, but if you haven't, please be sure to do so.
yeah, and if you want more information about the Creative Coffee Cafe, you can join our Discord, and you can get involved. Visit the website, creativecoffeecafe.com, and get more info there. There's a sign-up form for the Discord you can find there, too. And if you have any news or projects or anything that you'd like to feature or share that on our podcast, send it over to submit at creativecoffee.com, or creativecoffeecafe.com. And if we can, we'll get it on the next episode. Again, thanks for listening in on Inks and Lattes, where we're spilling the ink and dishing out drinks.